Hi, we're live here on our first ever Meatless Monday Hangout. I'm Stephanie Weaver of RecipeRenovator.com, and my guest today is Dreena Burton, who is a prolific vegan cookbook author. She's written Let Them Eat Vegan, Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan, Viva La Vegan, and The Everyday Vegan. And Dreena can be found at plantpoweredkitchen.com. She's become a blogging friend, which is great, and I'm really excited to have her here to talk about Meatless Monday, but specifically back to school, because Dreena is the mother of 3 daughters, and so she has lots of experience in this area, so I thought we'd get started. We do have the Q&A app up and running, so please type your questions in for Dreena, and we will do our best to answer those live. We'll be going until 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. So Dreena, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us, and also let's talk a little bit just about the concept of Meatless Monday. How did you first hear about it, and where did it come up for you?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think it's great that we're talking about this and bringing more awareness to Meatless Mondays, because it's a great way for people to just get started, to break out of their regular dietary patterns and move into healthier ways of eating, and even just expand what they're eating and choices, and learn about new foods. I think I first heard about Meatless Mondays online through social media, and I just think it's fabulous that it's helping people really open up their food vocabulary and what they can do day to day. And I find that when I talk to people about Meatless Mondays, they are surprised that they can do it, that it's not as hard as they thought it was, and that it sometimes carries over to other days of the week, and they really feel better choosing more plant-based foods for meals in the week. And it does seem daunting at first when we've grown up eating meat and dairy, and I grew up eating meat and dairy, but when you just employ a few techniques and a few recipes here and there, it's really not as hard as you may think it is.
Great. So could you talk a little bit about very briefly about your journey from growing up eating meat and dairy, as I did, to now being completely plant-based? How did you go? Was it gradually? You went vegetarian first and then went vegan, or did you go sort of cold turkey?
Yeah, no, it wasn't an overnight thing for me at all, and I know for some people it is, but it wasn't for me. I grew up with 5 sisters, and we all ate a very, meat and dairy-centric kind of diet, and we didn't even grow up in our time and where we lived. We didn't even have a lot of access to a great abundance of fresh vegetables. Most of what we had was canned or frozen, so meat was a big part of our daily meals. And in my teens and going into my 20s, I wasn't feeling good. In my 20s, I actually felt very unhealthy. I feel better now at 43 than I did when I was 23. And I was feeling, my body felt very uncomfortable and heavy, and I was having early signs of arthritis. And I started to explore my food choices, and I did some reading. Diet for New America was a very influential book for me, and I started experimenting, removing first red meat from my diet, and then later I eliminated chicken and fish. And dairy was the last barrier for me, because I really believed that, we have to have our dairy, I need my calcium. And again, the more I read and the more I understood about food, I realized that no, in fact, it's healthier for me to get my calcium from plant sources. And I did an experiment on that. My husband and I, we were engaged at the time, and we both said, okay, we'll give it a month and just see how we feel after that month. And it was remarkable. I mean, we felt so much better. We didn't go back.
That's great. And that's a similar story to me, where I was happily eating along, eating healthy, what I thought was really healthy, and then I got pretty sick and started looking at, removing first gluten and sugar, and then eventually going to a plant-based diet to just remove all that inflammation. So I totally relate to your story. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about parents and meatless meals, because I think it's a lot easier as a grown couple, like my husband and I are, to make all of our food choices. But when you're also caring for 2 or 3 or more young ones, how do you, what are some of your go-to meals, and what are some tips that you have for parents?
Sure. I mean, our girls have grown up on this diet, so they don't know meat or dairy, and in a way that's easier because I think if you're trying to transition and your children are teenagers, you're probably going to have a little more resistance than if they're younger. But they love their food, and I mean, they love what we eat, being beans and grains and nuts and seeds, and they don't love all the vegetables. You know, they don't have green halos and ask for more spinach or anything, but one day. But they really love all the foods that we eat, except for things that are very spicy. So I rely a lot on beans, because we eat beans every single day because they're so nutritious. They're full of protein and iron and fiber, and they're very satisfying, and they don't just have to be used what, you know, we may think beans might be used. I mean, they can be used in different ways. They can be pureed into dips, they can be worked into veggie burgers, they can be used in stews and soups and casseroles and all kinds of different things, and they can also be combined with things like nuts or grains and really provide hearty, satisfying textures. And I think that when people are going for meatless meals, that's what they think they're going to miss, is a lot of substance and things that are very satisfying. And if they just look at what's left without the meat, they won't be satisfied. They're probably going to be eating a couple of potatoes and a salad, or some pasta and, you know, a side salad or something. But it's about incorporating all of those other foods that really make your meals more satisfying. And so, you know, week to week we rely on whole grains. Rice and quinoa are very big for us, more than any of the other grains, because the kids really like those the best. And whole grain pastas like brown rice pasta and whole wheat or kamut pasta, whole grain breads and sprouted breads for lunches. And then I always work some of those things. If we're having pasta one night, I'll make extra pasta, or potatoes, I'll make extra potatoes so that I can use those for lunches, work those into lunches for the kids during the week. And at home we eat more nuts and seeds, because at school they can't have nut products. So I tend to work those into the meals at breakfast and dinner time.
Great, and that's because of food allergies. They can't bring nuts to school.
Right, and I think it's very dependent on where you live. I think there hasn't been a school that I've come across in our area that allows nuts. It's not just peanuts, it's nuts, period. So we rely a lot on things like almonds and almond butter and cashew butter and, you know, all the varieties of nut butters that are so delicious, not just nutritious, but really, really good, and kids love them. So we can't utilize any of those in dishes. And for me, it's not just sandwiches, because I use nuts in all kinds of things like veggie burgers and dips. So I have to be kind of conscious of that if I'm making a veggie burger, okay, well that one has nuts, so I can't use that in the school lunch the next day. So I find ways to get around it, and sometimes substitute seeds, because seeds are usually okay. So you do have to be aware of that for schools. And I think once you get used to it, you fall into rhythms with it. It's just kind of getting your mind around the switch. Usually September's stressful, getting back into it.
Yeah. So tell me, what would be a typical cooking pattern for you? Do you plan out your family's meals for the week and do a lot of cooking on Sunday? Do you cook stuff in bulk? Because I know a lot of people, the reason they don't make beans is because they just think it just takes too long. So how do you address some of those issues?
Good point. And there was a time when I cooked all of my beans from dried, and I don't get much time to do that myself now, because we have, as you mentioned, 3 girls. I have 2 in school full day and 1 in preschool, so I'm running back and forth with them because the preschool is half day and they're in activities in the afternoon, so it's a lot to juggle. So if you can't cook beans from dried, which they taste better too, if you can cook them on yourself, they do taste better, I find. But the brand that you should buy brands that are BPA free, and Eden Organic is one that is a BPA free canned bean. And also, not a lot of people know this, but Trader Joe's, their beans are BPA free. And so we do buy those and rely on those. But then there's other beans like lentils, which don't need any soaking overnight or any pre-soaking, and they can cook very quickly. Red lentils cook in about 20-25 minutes, and green or brown lentils in about 35-40 minutes. And also split peas, so if you're making a split pea soup or something, then those cook much faster. So I kind of recommend to people to have some canned beans on hand too, because it's just a quick fix that you can rely on. For me, I don't plan out my meals like a week ahead. I know that works for some people, and if it does, great. I tend to work more in about a 1 or 2 day time frame. Like I think, okay, today I might make this for dinner, and then for lunch this tomorrow, and dinner the next night. So I do my shopping around that, or just kind of get my mindset around it, what I might need. And that works for me. Breakfasts tend to be the same type of things for a few days, just because that makes the routine very easy. So we either do whole grain waffles, and I put nut butter on those instead of maple syrup, because the nut butter is very nutritious, and it helps satisfy them through the morning until recess. So that's one breakfast that I do with like almond butter on top of the whole grain waffle, and they love a bit of unsweetened applesauce with that as well. Or I make oatmeal for them, which really doesn't take too long. It takes about 10-15 minutes, and I can do that while I'm, piddling around cleaning the kitchen, and then that's a breakfast for them. So those are two like that I swap out all the time. And then sometimes I might make pancakes or toast or something else, but those are very easy breakfasts. And lunches, I rely a lot on beans and chickpeas and hummus and pastas and quinoas and things like that for them that they can take to school that are easy, but they're also getting at ages where they don't want their lunches to look too different. So I'm aware of that and trying to make their lunches look just like a sandwich, but maybe with something else on the side or tucked inside so that it doesn't look too different. Unfortunately, we kind of need to redefine what normal is, because normal is not particularly healthy right now.
Great. So what would be a typical lunch that you might pack tomorrow for your kids? What might be in their lunchbox?
Let's see, what do I have for them tomorrow? I have many days I have this recipe called tamari roasted chickpeas, and the girls love those. They're a staple. I basically take chickpeas and roast them in the oven with some balsamic vinegar and tamari and just a touch of maple syrup, and they absorb all the marinade, and they just love it because they're a little tangy, a little salty, tiny bit like sweet, but not really. It's just a balance, and I can use those I can mash them and put them in a sandwich, or I can put them with quinoa. They can eat it as like just a pilaf type of thing with a spoon, and have that as their main lunch. Often I'll put them in pasta, and they can have a leftover pasta with the chickpeas in there. Or I might put the chickpeas on the side and give them a sandwich with some veggies in there. Sometimes I do tofu and slice it and marinate it and put that in a sandwich. And then I always pack lots of fruit for snacks, and usually I do some home-baked muffins or some kind of granola bar or snack that I make that's very wholesome for them, because they do have very little. What I notice with kids at school is they don't have much time to eat. They give them about 10 or 15 minutes to eat their lunch. So it has to be easy for them to eat. So a sandwich is easy, but also I try to make the fruit easy for them to eat. So I'll peel their oranges, or just make it easy for them so that they can get nutritious food in their bodies for the rest of the day.
Great.
Yeah.
So we had a question come in, but before we move on, you have a lovely Canadian accent, and you were talking about tamari roasted chickpeas, which I would describe as tamari, which is a gluten-free soy sauce. So I just wanted to make sure that people weren't scratching their heads saying, what is she roasting these chickpeas with? So we do have a question from Chris Duffy, who said, do you feel that wheat and gluten products are safe to eat? My wife has gone gluten-free, and she feels so much better.
I think, wheat and gluten, it's really dependent on whether you have a sensitivity to that protein. We don't have any gluten allergies in our family or wheat allergies, and so we can, I kind of think we're fortunate in that regard because we have more choices for breads and things like that. I think wheat and gluten are completely fine if you're eating the whole grain forms of those. I think people get into trouble when they're eating a lot of processed wheat products, which is really the majority of the carbohydrates that people are eating. It tends to be white pasta, white bread, donuts, bagels, and it's all white food and very refined. But I think unless you have a sensitivity that you've been tested for, it's absolutely fine to eat whole grain, wheat, and gluten products.
So, and I would say I'm going to differ just a tiny bit from you, for Chris's sake, because I have found that I was actually tested 3 different times for sensitivity and never came up as being sensitive on the tests that are available. And it turned out when I did get gluten out of my diet, it was like night and day. I started feeling better. So I would say that if you're not feeling well, that is certainly a thing to look at. Processed foods, just eliminating processed foods from your diet will make a huge change in your health. If that doesn't do it, then I would say, get rid of processed sugar and try getting off of gluten and just kind of go by what your body says. And I totally agree with Dreena that if you're going to eat any grains, you want to eat them whole grains and you want to do as organic as possible. A lot of the issues that we think are coming from wheat are because it's been changed so much and hybridized so much to make it better for commercial baking. So they've actually increased the gluten by, I think, about 40 or 50% from what it would have been 100 years ago if you were eating wheat bread that was grown near where you live. So that's part of the reason why they think people are becoming so sensitive to it, just like all the nut allergies are coming up because so many more people just are becoming sensitized to different foods. So I hope that answers your question, Chris. And did you want to say anything else about that, Dreena?
No, I was just going to say I've heard the exact same thing, and that if anything, also try some organic choices because your body may be reacting to some of the processes that are involved with that product that is not inorganic. It could be pesticides or other things as well. So organic where you can is a good way to go.
Exactly. And I would say a lot of people might have a question about soy, which I think you and I both eat a lot of soy products. I only eat organic, non-GMO soybeans. So I take that extra step because if that's my main protein source, I'm going to spend that little extra 50 cents or 30 cents to get that organic because it really does make a huge difference. And we think some of the reasons why people become allergic to soy is because there's so much genetically modified soy out in the food system. So again, we're both, I think, advocates of eating as organic as you can afford. And what I found is that once I eliminated all the processed foods I was buying, I totally still had the food budget to then buy organic. So it's just really a question of shifting away from some things you might have been doing and shifting into things that are better for you. And Chris says, thanks for addressing the question. I think wheat itself has been changed. That's exactly right. That's what we were saying. It's much higher in gluten than it used to be, as well as some other things that have been changed about it. So that can be why people have sensitivities. So thanks so much for your question, Chris. So one of our questions that we had for Dreena was, do you rely on a lot of vegan meat alternatives, or do you go more sort of natural things? So that would be an interesting question, because I know a lot of times people just, they want to have tempeh bacon, or they want to have the, fake bologna, or they want to switch that way. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, and especially for Meatless Monday, people sometimes think, okay, this is a good way to try to go meatless, is to choose a veggie-based hot dog or veggie-based deli meat or something, and it is a better choice. It's a better choice for many reasons, for your health and the environment, and for the animals too, obviously. We don't use a lot of them, mostly because when we made this switch to eating plant-based, they weren't available. It's almost 20 years now, and so those foods weren't available, and we got very used to eating what I call the vegan basics, being beans and grains and nuts and seeds and veggies and fruit. So we don't use them a lot. What I use them the most for is when the kids have hot lunch days at school, sometimes I'll give them the veggie alternative for the hot lunch. The hot lunch menu is atrocious, but if there's a hot dog on the menu, then I can pack them a veggie dog. And then they kind of feel like, they're eating what the other kids are eating, but it's a healthier choice, and I'll put it in a whole wheat bun instead of a white bun. The other thing I use them for is kids' parties, because all the kids' parties, it's the choice of food is either hot dog or pizza, and that's it. I once served hummus at a party, and I made kids cry. So My kids were happy. And one
Dreena Burton made kids cry. I love it. Takeaway.
My kids were having a blast, and one other boy was loving it, but there was two girls crying, and then I pulled out the chocolate cake, and they were fine. So I said, okay, I will never do that again. So I will serve veggie dogs, or I'll get some pizzas and put the dad cheese on and that kind of thing. And then it's kind of like kid friendly, and it's just they feel like they're part of what is the norm right now. So that's what I think they're very useful for, and for people who really are, they have a very favorite meal, and all they want to do is swap the chicken out. Well, then they can use one of the Guardian or one of the other products that are very much made to mimic a chicken meat. Right. So yeah. But I think overall, in the long run, it really is best to rely on the whole foods because your body responds better to them. And also, I do find you open up your sort of like culinary experience with them. If you're only substituting meat with a full meat, you kind of lose out on exploring new cuisines and trying how to combine beans and nuts or grains and nuts or something like that to get a whole new texture that's really interesting. Because I can make veggie burgers with nuts and grains, or a loaf with lentils and steel cut oats, and the texture is wonderful and it's very satisfying and it's delicious and it's healthier and it's also less expensive if you're relying on those whole foods than the full meat. So I'll just mention that. And long run, you kind of want to move in that direction.
That's great. I find too that there are certain things that sometimes I just don't have time to make them myself. And as long as it's the one issue, if you're off of gluten, is a lot of the faux meats are made with gluten because that's one of the ways that that the meats are made is by actually taking the wheat protein and turning it into a meat-like substitute. So you do have to read the labels. So for me, a lot of those meat options aren't options because I am gluten-free, but they are very tasty, and certainly I think it does help. One thing you just mentioned that kind of struck a chord with me is that most of the ethnic cuisines around the world don't rely that heavily on meat because meat has always been expensive, and so it's often used in small quantities in other ethnic cuisine. So it's really easy to go meatless and do Japanese night or Thai night or Mexican night. And you might not think of those cuisines necessarily as being meatless, but many of them are. And so you can certainly vary. You don't just have to have chili every Monday. You don't just have to have veggie burger every Monday. There's lots of amazing options, and Indian food is wonderful. And especially if you like a lot of spice and texture, Indian food is fantastic, and there's very little meat and dairy in it to begin with because of how they revere the cow in India. So it's just kind of interesting. To me, it definitely has made me a much more creative cook to actually have these restrictions in my diet. I cook much more creatively than I did 10 years ago. And so if any of you like to cook, I would encourage you to check out both of our websites because we have tons of recipes, and then we also have links to lots of other great vegan and plant-based blogs that we enjoy and know and appreciate those recipes as well. So you mentioned a little bit about hot lunch days. Can you talk a little bit more about that, some of the challenges that you've seen with hot lunch? And I think a big part of being plant-based or going meatless is there's a social aspect. I mean, you've touched on that a little bit. You don't want the kids, well, you don't want to make children cry, of course. But you don't want to have your kids feel like social outcasts. And I know just as adults, sometimes I have a challenge of, do I offer to bring food to a dinner party when someone is making a full menu, and how do you handle that? And it gets tiring at times. So that would be helpful, I think, in the last few minutes that we have, for maybe you talk about some of those kind of issues for people.
Sure, I think you really have to gauge where your kid is too, where your child is with their sensitivities. Our two older girls, so I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, and at their ages, they really understand why we, not the 4-year-old, but the older girls, why we eat the way we do. They appreciate it, they enjoy it, and they don't actually want the the other alternatives. They don't want the meat and dairy. They do want to be part of the group. They do want to feel like they're kind of like everyone else. So I do try to look on the hot lunch menu to find some options. This year they do have veggie dogs. So I've agreed to, have them have the veggie dogs once a month or whatever it is. And one year they had veggie sushi. They had just the cucumber sushi. And so I've done that. So where the alternatives are there, I will, bring that in for them so they can be part of it. But most of the menu is really dairy and meat laden. It's actually shocking to see how much meat and dairy is in it. And also it's very processed. Which is just not good for the kids when they're trying to get through the day and they're learning. It doesn't rev up their system. It just really, draws them down, and it's not a good learning situation to have that, heavy food in their systems. So, but I do, so I try to talk to them about it, and like I said, they're really understanding, and it's always worked out well. For a few years, I did match some of the hot lunch days, so there was a pasta day, and I'd send pasta with some chickpeas. Or there was the hot dog day, and I'd match the hot dog. If there was a pizza day, and there was, I'd make pizza, say, the night or 2 nights before, and just keep extra so that I could pack it in the lunch the next day. So I just try to, it does take more effort. I mean, it's a lot, it takes a little extra time to do that than just order off the menu. But in the long run, it's so much healthier for them. And it's part of, I say, kids really come to understand and love the food. They know if they grow up on refined foods, they're really going to crave it and want it. If they grow up eating more whole foods, it is what they want. My kids at times will have a treat at a party and they feel not so good after. If they eat too much of it, for sure, they've eaten and they say, oh, Mom, I don't feel good, and I really like how we eat because it makes us feel good. So they do make that connection. And it's important that we help them grow with that. We have to model it, and we have to show them from the beginning that these are healthy food choices, but they can also be delicious. I mean, my kids don't miss out on treats like cookies and cakes or anything like that. We still have all of those things, and they have delicious meals. It's about kind of changing the perspective on what you're eating. The social aspect, I really feel like the earlier years are harder when kids don't really understand, and as they start to develop after about grade 2 or 3, they're very strong in their attachment to it, and they understand why you're doing it. So they're with you, they're not against you. At least that's been my experience.
How many of your kids' friends are also eating either plant-based or have a different diet? Are they fairly common or fairly uncommon to be eating the way your kids are?
I would love to say it's common here, but I have one friend that is fully plant-based, and her 3 kids are fully plant-based. I think they're the only other ones in the school of about 280. So I think there's probably a few vegetarian kids, and my girls play hockey, and no one on their hockey team eats the way we do. But I will always send along treats too. Like if they have a hockey event and they're looking for some kind of treats, I will make something that they can bring, and then it kind of opens up to their friends that, wow, their food's really good, and they can feel proud about what they eat. Again, that's more effort than picking up Timbits, that's the Canadian, again I'm talking Canadian here, Canadian donut shop here, but it helps them feel like pretty included with the group and something to be proud of, and the kids love it. And many times I've sent extra muffins to school because my girl comes home and says, oh, my friend loved that muffin, can you bring it again tomorrow? Or so, I've mentioned to them I can't feed the whole school, but I'll send a treat here and there. So it's worthwhile sometimes making something extra that they can share, just so that they can show their friends that the food is really good and they feel good about it.
That's great. Well, Dreena, it's 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you so much for being my first guest on the Meatless Monday Hangout. And please check out Dreena's wonderful books and her fantastic website, plantpoweredkitchen.com. and visit me at RecipeRenovator.com. We look forward to seeing you all online, and thank you so much for your questions and for being here today.
Thanks, Stephanie. It was a good time. Take care.